The Leader of the National Party.
Mr Speaker, I move that this House condemns Bill Shorten and the Federal Labor Party for its destructive plan to shut down WA's live sheep export industry and calls on the McGowan government to stand up and fight to save an industry which generates hundreds of jobs in Western Australia.
Yes.
On the eve of a federal election, Acting Speaker, on the eve of a federal election, this is a very timely debate to be had in this place because there is a very clear difference between the views of the Federal Labor Party and that of the Federal Coalition. And it is incumbent, I think, on this place to note the fact that a significant industry in Western Australia is likely to be ended should we come to a shortened Labor government on Saturday. And that this parliament, because this is a West Australian sector that is under direct attack from the shortened Labor Party, should be sending a very strong message to say that we expect more, And I would like to know what those opposite have done to make sure that Bill Shorten has made a decision, and his cabinet or shadow cabinet has made a decision that's based on fact rather than chasing inner city votes of the Greens in the Melbournes and the Sydneys of the East Coast. So on 30th of April in 2019, Acting Speaker, the Labor Party launched their six-point plan. The Federal Labor Party launched their six-point plan covering animal welfare issues, and they reaffirmed a pledge that they had made public some time before that they would immediately ban the northern summer live sheep trade, and they proposed a plan which would phase out the live sheep trade within 5 years. And it struck to the very core of many in my constituency, many in the member for Rose constituency, many in the member for Moore's constituency. And it's not just the farmers that we are talking about, because this is a sector that has a significant supply chain, and it will have a significant impact on many West Australian jobs. And this is a state government that professes to be supportive of creating jobs. Now, there is a sector here already employing a significant number of Western Australians, and but for a policy change and the uncertainty that's been created because of this national debate, we have a sector that is under incredible stress and incredible pressure. And I'll come to that, Acting Speaker, because there are people that are involved in this that have made their views public over the course of the last few weeks as we approach Saturday with a federal election. It is a decision by the Federal Labor government. Should this be enacted, should a future government decide that the live export sector for sheep should be shut down, it would decimate the West Australian sheep sector. It is a policy that attacks our Western Australian farmers, our Western Australian feedlotters, our transporters, our shearers, those that produce food and pellets for the animals and in the supply chain, and many others that are involved indirectly in this trade. As I said, it is a uniquely and almost uniquely Western Australian trade, and that is why it is an attack by Bill Shorten's Labor Party on Western Australia. That is the choice that we have on Saturday. It's a policy born of the eastern states, the inner suburbs of Melbourne and Sydney, where you see the Labor Party chasing the Green vote. That is their competition. And they are seeking to make sure that they are balancing what their policies, I think they would like their policies to be, with how they can win as many seats as they can in those seats where we see a very high distrust and great uncertainty about this sector. And I'll talk a little bit about why that exists. Because we're not denialists in the Nationals. We understand that not everybody understands or approves of live export. We're certainly not oblivious to that, and neither is the sector. And I would argue in the last 6 months, probably 6 to 12 months, the sector has tried to pull itself up and made some significant changes to regain the trust of the community right across Australia. I want to put on record that Mr Shorten is no friend of WA, and he's no friend of the agricultural sector, because when you have a policy like this, central to your agricultural policy, a policy that will kill jobs in Western Australia, you can't be a friend of Western Australia. It will phase out live sheep export over 5 years. It will be devastating for those businesses involved and also the communities that they operate in. And these are the communities that I represent, Acting Speaker. the communities that many of our regional members represent, not just those in the agricultural sector, but the major regional centres as well, and right the way through to our ports and all the people that work in that supply chain as well. I would like to know if Bill Shorten or the Premier or others have actually taken the time to go and sit down and meet with those people in the supply chain of this very important sector. Has either of them stopped to talk to a shearing contractor or a hay contractor? What about the people employed at the pellet mills, like some of the constituents in the member for Rose electorate, or the truckie who takes enormous pride in being able to put food on the table and look after his family and has a job? And some of them, these are family businesses that have been born of handing it down from generation to generation in these trucking businesses that have been involved in transporting live animals. Have they sat down and talked to those people? I'm going to hazard a guess, Acting Speaker, that neither the Premier or Bill Shorten has done that. I know that Bill Shorten hasn't because he hasn't been to regional WA. He's been here a fair bit during the campaign. WA is certainly in the mix, but he hasn't made it over the Darling Scar, as far as I can remember. And he certainly hasn't explained to the entire sector why he wants to wipe out their livelihood. And he hasn't stopped to think that there is an alternative, and one that has been worked on and pursued in conjunction with the current Liberal National Coalition government and the sector here in Western Australia. And I would hazard a guess that he hasn't done any of that because he simply doesn't care. And that's because he knows that his votes are in the city and they're in Sydney and Melbourne. And I fear for WA, Acting Speaker, under a Shorten government, and my constituents across regional WA fear for their future. So before I go any further, I would like for some members to provide some context about this very important sector here in WA. We produce some of the best lamb, mutton and wool in the nation, in the world, and we export that to over 100 countries, Acting Speaker. We have trade relationships that have gone back for many, many years as that trade has been built up over time. And the Department of Ag and Food, or DPIRD as it's now known, estimated that in 2015, and I've got some more recent figures further on, that WA's sheep flock was about 14 million. We've struggled in Western Australia. The sheep flock has diminished over time quite significantly for a number of reasons, but there is a renewed support for this, and there are many in the sector that see a mixed enterprise as being able to manage some of the seasonal and climatic changes that we're dealing with in the agricultural sector as a very important buffer. And we've seen some very good wool prices and some very good meat prices, and the live export sector is a very important part of that mix. And that's very important for everybody to understand, that you can't just simply pull a section of that sector out and expect it to continue unaffected. It can't continue to operate that. They are integrated farming operations, and in some cases have been built up with infrastructure and significant investment over a long period of time. And yet we have a government, a future government, talking about potentially shutting down or phasing out the industry over 5 years. It will take far longer. And I suspect once they actually are confronted with the reality, if heaven forbid we are faced with a Shorten government post-Saturday, that they will find it's far more difficult than what they're suggesting. But I know that they're saying it because they need to win votes in Sydney and Melbourne. There's about 5,250 sheep farm businesses, so 5,250 businesses that have sheep involved, and on average, you'd probably got about 2,700 sheep. They're big calls. It depends on where you are in the state as to how many you have in your own flock. Most of the sheep that we grow here in Western Australia, it has changed in recent times, but most are the merino. I think it's about 87% of our flock is merino sheep, and in 15-16, the total sheep turn-off, meat, sheep and live export was around 5.56 head. And million, sorry, thank you. Forgot the million on the end, just the 5 there. The breakdown of processing versus live export, so around 3.8 million into the domestic processing market, 1.67 exported live, and about 84,000 over the border into our domestic market interstate. It contributes, Acting Speaker, around $200 million per year to our state's economy. 200 million. It's not insignificant. And in Western Australia, that live export accounts for 86% of national live sheep exports in total. So it is a West Australian, predominantly West Australian sector. And that is why I say that the Federal Labor Party's policy is an attack on Western Australia. And they are remote from the decision makers, and they are easy to dismiss because we are so far away from where they are trying to win their votes. So I don't think for one moment that Mr Shorten has considered any of this, and I don't think that he has considered the collateral damage there is for our broader agricultural sector. He hasn't sat down with farmers to listen to their concerns, and certainly that is something that we have done. And we've done it with our federal colleagues as well. And I have to say that the Federal Minister for Agriculture, David Littleproud, has taken some criticism in relation to this, but it's a difficult period of time. He hasn't, however, shied away from the fact that he needed to come down and have face-to-face conversations with those that it was impacting. And so we accompanied him out to Brookton Farmers property, who brought together a number of farmers at the end of last year, and Murray Hall hosted him for a round-table session to express some of the concerns of the industry and to talk about what some of the potential solutions were. And Murray's comments were reported in the Countryman after the visit, and he's a very succinct man, Murray. "What I really fear is ill-informed eastern states crossbenchers and politicians from both sides making decisions when they haven't investigated the downstream consequences, including environmental impacts and pressure on the flock in a destock situation and what it means for WA." That was in the Countryman from your hand side. It was from the 13th of December, and that was immediately after the meeting that was held with myself and a number of my National Party colleagues and the Federal Minister for Agriculture. He hasn't gone, I'm saying it's Bill Shorten and any of his cabinet, gone to speak to anyone like another one of my constituents, Corrigan hay contractor, Corey McGuellan, before he launched his 6-point plan and pledged to phase out live export. He hasn't done that, because if you'd spoken to Corey and read what he'd contributed in another article to the Countryman just this month on the 9th of May, perhaps the decision would be slightly different. So I'm going to read to you what Corey has said, because this is a really significant concern for him in advance of his decision to go and vote on Saturday. "It's hard not to get upset when your whole life is on the line. That is the harrowing state of mind that Corrigan hay contractor Corey McGuellan is struggling to deal with while sweating on the outcome of the May 18th federal election. The survival of Mr McGuellan's business, Milden Hay, is dependent on WA's live export industry, with most of its income coming from baling straw to be processed into pellets for sheep feed aboard livestock carriers. With federal Labor standing firm on its pledge to phase out the trade within 5 years if elected, the self-confessed work ethic is fearing the death of his business. If Labor do that, it is the end of our business. It will not be viable for our business to continue. With where we are at now, we will lose everything. I'm not talking tractors and machinery, I'm talking house, the whole 9 yards. It will send us broke, basically. It's pretty hard to deal with, really." He operates the family-owned Milden Hay alongside wife Catherine, with the help of a casual employee, and support their 4 children, 10, 4, 2 and 6 months. The 30-year-old former boilermaker admits he is no stranger to toiling long hours to cut hay and also bale straw for Williams-based feedstock supplier Mako Feeds, Australia's stock pellet production. He said the Labor's live export policy was too city-focused and failed to consider potential ramifications for rural Australia. We understand very clearly what that policy means for our constituency and for a sector that is very important for Western Australia's state's economy. We often get asked why we export live sheep, and we get told that there are options for alternatives and that we should be promoting the increase of domestic processing and jobs here onshore. And absolutely, you would not find any objection from the West Australian National Party on increasing the opportunities for domestic processors, for increasing jobs here, but it's not at the cost of one for another. They both work in this sector together in Western Australia. And I encourage members to, if they haven't already, visit a website for the newly formed Sheep Collective. Now, this is a collective that's brought together the transporters, the contractors, the farmers, the exporters. They've understood that they have to operate now as a whole. The Sheep Collective. So this is Bindi Murray, Dr Holly Ludeman. There's a whole raft of them, and it's representatives from all along the supply chain. And they've recognised, one, that we need to do better as a sector at explaining what it is that we do and why it's important. We understand that we need to be more transparent in the way that we discuss what happens, and that perhaps that hasn't always been the case in the past, and that they all have a responsibility along the supply chain to make sure that the public that understands what it is that why it is that this sector is important, why it is that we take a scientific and animal welfare-based approach to managing the entire supply chain. And if you actually took the time to sit down and talk to each of those individuals along the process, you would understand that that is exactly what has been happening for many, many years. Now, we will never ever defend situations like the Awassi Express. It should never have happened, and nobody would say that that was an acceptable or acceptable outcome in relation to animal welfare. But I would like to say that the industry as a whole, since that was brought to light, has made significant inroads in trying to make sure that they are shifting the way that they do business, they are becoming more transparent, and the government at the same time is also working to do that under the guidance of Minister Littleproud. The sector would be the first to say that they need to continuously improve. Continuous improvement in all elements of any business is a necessity. And I think you would find that we have done that over many years. We certainly do not treat animals the way that we did even 30, 40, 50 years when we were loading them onto ships. The way that you manage animals, the way that you raise animals, the way that you put them on trucks, all of those things on scientific basis are improved continuously, because there is no benefit to us in having a poor animal welfare outcome in the long run. That is not what people get involved in the industry for. Bill Shorten's plan is to throw away an entire sector, one that is peculiarly focused on WA. Our plan, federally and at a state level, trying to push this government as well, has been to try and work with the industry to address the issues that the community and we think are unacceptable. Improving transparency, lifting the bar for exporters, placing animal welfare and science at the centre of every decision. And that comes with some pain, and that is certainly causing some pain in the sector as we speak. It includes things like discussions around the summer ban, which was, by the way, initially imposed by the industry itself. And then there was an order made by the Department of Agriculture federally that they would continue that this year. But initially imposed by the industry themselves, in recognition that they needed to prove to the public that they were taking the issues that were being raised seriously. This, along with new stocking densities, independent auditing of the pen air turnover, the watering arrangements, a reduction in the notifiable mortality rate, these are all part of the response to a number of reports that have been created by the department, a number of reports that have been put together by experts, tested by industry, and there are some things that industry do not agree with, and they think it will make it very difficult for them to continue. But they are continuing to work constructively with the government to make sure that we can get an outcome for this very important sector. We are not prepared to walk away from a sector for Western Australia that is so, so important to so many. All of those things that I've just mentioned, which are outlined in the response to the reports that have been created by the government, how they're going to implement them, when they're going to implement them, what measures they are taking to address some of the concerns that have been raised as a result of these independent reports. This is in addition to the appointment of an external and independent Inspector General of Live Animal Exports, appointed by the Minister for Agriculture, David Littleproud, to oversee the department's regulation of live export and also to report to the public and the Minister. There is a new level of transparency in this sector that has been recognised as something that we need to do. I say we because this is part of a regional community, my communities. We need to, as a sector, do better at explaining and bringing people along to understand what it is that we do. You can't expect people to value something they don't understand. And I think as an industry, whether it's live export or any number of other things we see in the agricultural sector, we all acknowledge that we need to do better at that. But we also need the community to understand that we have and will always put animal welfare at the centre of those decisions, and we need to make sure that we continue to build that trust across the community. So what is this government doing? Because that's the question that we have as a part of this debate today. Because if you agree that this sector is important from a West Australian point of view, and we've heard the Premier and the Minister for Agriculture on a number of occasions say that they support our sheep sector and the live export industry here in Western Australia, I would like to know if they've actually done some modelling so that they could demonstrate to their counterparts at a federal level exactly what the impact of that policy is likely to be. Have they tried to dissuade their counterparts in Canberra that this is something that's likely to be very harmful here in Western Australia? What are they doing to stand up for our West Australian farmers? Beyond responding to the questions that we've asked in this place and the debates that we've raised in this place and in the Legislative Council. Remember, 1.7 million exported from WA in 2017. 86% of all national live sheep exports from Western Australia, worth $210 million in 2017 alone directly. And there is a whole raft of evidence from the Meat and Livestock Authority and others that are involved in the supply chain about the flow-on impacts of that $210 million directly that you can see in terms of flow-on through the remainder of the community. Has the government done any modelling on what will happen if this policy was successfully introduced? Have you done any modelling to share with your colleagues to explain to them the impact of this policy? And if you haven't, why not? Because when you say you support the sector, then you should be doing things and backing that up with actions that actually give cause to the sector to say, hang on, we know the West Australian government is on our side. They're in there arguing with their federal counterparts saying, we need to rethink this policy. Because even if they don't get in, we need to see that policy wiped from their books. It needs to be wiped from their books because they will not stop there. They will not stop there. So it's the sheep industry one day. I can promise you the beef industry will be the next. And the only reason it's not on the table at this election, call me cynical, is because of the impact it would have in the likes of Queensland and the seats that they need to win up there. So it's politics that are protecting the beef sector, but they are all very nervous, Acting Speaker. They are all very nervous. The truth is that we know that the words of this Premier and the Minister for Agriculture are just a very thin veneer because we've seen their actions. We've seen the actions of the Minister for Agriculture in previous iterations when she stood on the bridge with anti-live export supporters and professed her support for the end of the industry. And that's why people are cynical about this, and that's why they expect that this government does more than just say, we support you. They want to see action. They want to see you telling Bill Shorten loudly, that you do not support that policy and that you will not support that policy should, heaven forbid, we have a Labor government post-Saturday. This Parliament must condemn Bill Shorten's policy because it is anti-WA, it is anti-farming, anti-small business, and it is anti-jobs. It is the antithesis of everything that this government has said it supports. And so how could they possibly vote against a motion that says we need to support jobs, we need to support an important sector, we need to be supporting our farmers? It is a very, very important sector, Acting Speaker. There are many people that are very nervous. I think it would go a long way to see a strong statement from this West Australian Parliament today to give them confidence that you will be in there should we, heaven forbid, have a Bill Shorten government post-Saturday. I would like to hear this government put on record their position regardless, because we have had this debate and I haven't seen any action in relation to the matters that we've raised today. And the sector is hurting. The uncertainty of this national debate on a West Australian economy and the people that are reliant on it is very, very disappointing. And these are good people that have worked hard and that deserve our government's support. And they are certainly doing their bit. If you go to the website and look at the Sheep Collective, you look at the work that's being done by WA Farmers, PGA, the Livestock Transporters Association, to work hand in hand with the government to make sure they can address the issues that have been raised in those independent reports that have raised the concerns around some of the issues that this industry has been challenged with in the past. We need to make sure that we are working with them, not simply ending a sector that so many are reliant on.